Before I settled into this quiet life, I was an FBI agent, stationed at a facility so remote it felt like the edge of the world. We conducted experiments there, the kind that would make your blood run cold. One experiment in particular has stayed with me. It involved a creature, a beast that looked like a nightmarish blend of man and wolf. It was enormous, muscles bulging under its thick fur, and it had these eyes, these haunting yellow eyes that seemed to glow with an inner fire. I only ever saw it from a distance, but even from afar, its raw power was palpable. It was like standing next to a roaring furnace, You could feel the heat, the danger, just radiating off it. They released it into this fenced-off area, a sort of nature reserve filled with all sorts of wildlife. I don't know why they did it, but this creature was designed to kill, and it did. I won't go into the grisly details, but it was a sight that still haunts my dreams. I've seen some strange things in my time at that facility, things that would make a hardened man shiver, but that creature, it was something else. It was like it was from another world, and the way it moved, the way it hunted, it was like watching a force of nature. After witnessing that creature, my days at the facility were never the same. Every creak, every shadow, every unexpected sound, it all made me think of the beast. I couldn't shake the image of its muscular form, its yellow eyes, the way it moved with such deadly grace. I tried to find out more about it, but it was like hitting a brick wall. No one would talk. No one would even acknowledge that the creature existed. It was like we were all part of some unspoken pact to pretend it was just a figment of our imaginations. But I knew what I saw. I knew that creature was real. And I knew it was still out there, in that fenced-off area, doing what it was designed to do. The thought of it kept me up at night, kept me on edge during the day. I started to notice other strange things at the facility too. Unexplained occurrences, things that didn't add up. Like how some of the wildlife in the fenced-off area would just disappear without a trace. Or how sometimes late at night I'd hear these low, guttural sounds echoing through the halls. I asked questions, tried to get answers, but it was always the same response. Silence, evasion, denial. It was like everyone was too afraid to talk, too afraid to admit what was really going on. I've got a tale for you that's going to make your hair stand on end. I've been following your channel for a while now, and it's been a real comfort knowing I am not the only one who's seen things that don't make a lick of sense. So I was up in the Appalachian Mountains. Just a regular guy taking a break from the hustle and bustle of city life. I am not a believer in ghosts or goblins, but what I saw up there, well, it shook me to my core. I was sleeping in this little cabin I'd rented, nestled right in the heart of the mountains. It was quiet, peaceful, and I felt safe. That was until I heard this weird noise outside my window. Sounded like scratching, like something was trying to get in. I got up to check it out, and that's when I saw it. This thing, this creature, was right outside my window. It was pale, with long arms and fingers that ended in claws. Its eyes were like two black holes, and it had this twisted grin on its face. It was like something out of a nightmare, a mix of man and beast, and it was staring right at me. I was shocked, just staring back at this thing. And then all of a sudden it lunged through the window, landing right in the middle of my cabin. I fell back, and it gave me this weird look before jumping back out the window. I was too scared to move, too shocked to call for help. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere with this creature. It was gone, but the mess it left behind was proof enough that it had been there. My window was shattered, glass everywhere. And then I heard another window break. It was back, and it was inside my cabin. I could hear it moving around, and I knew it was coming for me. I managed to slam my bedroom door shut just as it reached for me. I could hear it clawing at the door, its breathing heavy and ragged. In a panic, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I could barely get the words out, but the dispatcher could hear the fear in my voice and sent help. The clawing eventually stopped and I heard the creature leave. When the cops showed up, they found me huddled in a corner, shaking like a leaf. They searched the cabin, but there was no sign of the creature. They took my statement, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They suggested it might have been a burglar, but I knew the truth. After doing some research, I found out that the creature I saw was called the Rake. It's a paranormal entity that's been around for centuries, preying on people and leaving them traumatized. I found out that I wasn't the only one who'd seen it, and that gave me some comfort. Since that night, I've done everything I can to protect myself. I've put extra locks on my doors and windows, and I always keep a weapon close by. I still have nightmares about that night, and I know I'll never fully recover from the trauma. But I'm not going to let the Rake control my life. I'm going to keep fighting, keep moving forward, and keep sharing my story. In the weeks that followed, I found comfort in the stories of others who'd survived encounters with the Rake. We formed a sort of community, sharing our experiences and supporting each other through the fear and uncertainty. Looking back, I feel lucky to be alive. The Rake is a creature that most folks never come across, and from what I've read, those who do don't often live to tell the tale. But in a weird way, I'm grateful for the experience. It's made me more aware of the dangers that could be lurking out there, and it's given me a new appreciation for life. Hello there, my name is Hank. I'm a rancher living in Texas, specifically near a small town called Martha. I'm in my 50s now and moved here in my early 30s. Like many people residing here, I was drawn to Texas for its vast open spaces as well as the rugged beauty of the landscape. I also appreciate the opportunity to be self-reliant. I own a small herd of cattle that I tend to regularly, and then I get busy with other tasks around the ranch. Depending on the time of year, I might be fixing fences, tending to the cattle, or hunting for game. I grew up hunting in the woods, but ever since moving to Marfa, I've developed a fondness for tracking game across the open plains. I live with my wife, Susan, and our 2 children, both of whom are in college. Every November, hunting season begins, and I spend a few weeks bringing in game whenever I can to stock our freezer for the winter. Susan and I are particularly fond of venison. Deer are plentiful in these parts, and the daily limits are generous. So sometimes Susan or my eldest daughter Emily will join me on a hunting trip. A few years back in 2022, I just finished up a big project on the ranch and was eager to get out into the wilderness. After settling back into a routine at home for about a week, I decided to take Susan out for a hunting trip. This was also a sort of date day for us since I've been busy for almost a month. We set out very early, just as dawn was breaking, and headed north towards the more open plains, but not too far from the ranch since deer are often found grazing near the edges of the woods. As we were setting up, I was letting the truck idle, maybe 100 or so yards from the edge of the woods. We were just off the edge of a well-known landmark, an old abandoned barn that stood alone in a field. I'd just finished pulling everything together when Susan said something and pointed towards the woods. When I looked up, I could see a dark shape moving along the edge of the trees. This isn't an uncommon sight in Texas at all. At first, I assumed it was a deer, since they like to graze near the woods, but it also could have been a coyote or even a fellow hunter, although I doubted that. I got a little excited, but could tell that something was off with Susan. She was sitting stiffly and staring at the woods. When I asked what was wrong, she said that something just didn't look right. It was about 6 a.m. now and we were ready to hunt, but she seemed really bothered. I offered to drive the truck closer and see what it was. She was resistant at first, but hesitantly agreed. She gripped the edge of the truck seat tightly as we drove towards the barn and the edge of the woods. Meanwhile, as soon as I started moving the truck, the creature at the edge of the woods turned our way and seemed to be observing us. I expected it to run off as we got closer, but it didn't. That put me on edge as I was now thinking it was a coyote that was too used to humans. These animals can be dangerous and eventually end up trying to break into barns or getting too close to people in aggressive ways. We got to about 50 yards from the edge of the woods and I pulled a pair of binoculars out of my coat. It took a second to get situated, but I got the creature in my sights and realized it wasn't a coyote at all. By now it was trying to move deeper into the woods. As I watched, holding my breath, it moved on 2 feet, not like a coyote, but like a stiff human. Susan then hit my arm and told me she wanted to go back. "Hold on," I said, wanting to get a better look. I didn't dare drive the truck in closer since the ground was very uneven, but I kept my eyes glued to the bipedal creature. It wove in and out of the trees, poking out every few seconds to look back at us. The trees obscured it a bit, but I was able to see longer, shaggy hair on its body, matted in some places. It was a dark, almost black-brown, and had long arms that reached down past where I would say the knees were. I asked Susan if she wanted to look, but she shook her head and asked again if we could please head back. In fact, she demanded it. We switched spots so I could keep looking at the creature while she directed us back out to the hunting spot. As the truck moved away from the woods, the thing came out onto the edge of the forest a little further, but not like it had been before. It was a bumpy ride, but I could see that it was observing us and would occasionally bend down, again with stiff knees. When we were far out from the woods, Susan and I started hunting and didn't talk about it until I brought it up an hour later. I asked if she wanted to know what it was. She said no at first, but then gave in to curiosity. Plus, we couldn't see the creature at the edge of the woods anymore. I explained that it almost looked like a man in a black and brown ghillie suit, but one who was walking strangely. She looked at me and said she'd noticed that too, that the movements weren't fluid like a human, but they were very straightforward and more animal-like. We tried to focus on hunting, but after an hour only caught sight of a few smaller deer and a rabbit. So she and I decided to head back in. Since that day, we haven't seen anything like the creature again, but I've brought it up over beers in the bar and have heard similar stories. Locals in the area seem pretty comfortable with the idea of Bigfoot or something ape-like around. I'm thinking that's what we must have seen. Whatever it was, I didn't get a feeling of menace or aggression about it, more that it wanted to be left alone and stay unseen. Eventually, Susan admitted that she knew about the stories too, and had heard them growing up, but never believed that such things existed until we saw it for ourselves. I remember this one time, about 5 years back, when me and my wife decided to leave the hustle and bustle of Chicago and settle down in the quaint countryside of Montana. We found ourselves a cozy rental cabin, nestled deep in a serene neighborhood. The place was right at the end of a cul-de-sac, a perfect getaway from our previous home where cars zoomed by every minute. We thought it'd be a nice change, a chance to be close to nature. A massive ranch with untouched land stretched out behind our cabin. We imagined it would be pleasant to have critters as our neighbors. The neighborhood was small, just a handful of cabins around. We got acquainted with our neighbors soon after our arrival. They were friendly folk. But one thing that intrigued us was the large ranch at the end. It always seemed deserted. No one in the neighborhood seemed to know much about it. Like I said, our cabin was a rental. All the cabins around were fairly new, so there wasn't a long history of residents. Our neighbors mentioned that they hadn't seen any activity at the ranch. They'd occasionally hear strange noises late at night, which they brushed off as coyotes or mountain lions that were known to inhabit the region. About a couple of months after we moved in, we adopted this adorable Labrador puppy from the local animal shelter. We named him Bruno. Bruno was full of energy but lacked training. But we figured, since we had a spacious backyard, we had plenty of room for him to run around and play. One evening, I returned from work earlier than usual. My wife was visiting her folks and I went out to check on Bruno. To my surprise, I found that he had dug a hole under the fence and was nowhere in sight. One of my neighbors, a kind lady with 2 kids, told me that she saw Bruno running towards the ranch. She would have chased him down, but her kids needed her attention. So I decided to venture towards the ranch to find Bruno. The ranch was hidden behind a thick line of pines. I had never really taken a good look at it before. As I approached the back fence of the ranch, I noticed an old weathered sign that read, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." I hesitated, wondering if I should risk trespassing. The ranch looked abandoned. The fence was worn out and the undergrowth was thick. I peeked through a window and saw dusty old furniture, but no sign of any inhabitants. I was in 2 minds about whether to go ahead and trespass, when I heard a chilling scream. I ducked and tried to see through the fence. All of a sudden, everything went quiet. And then, I saw this rat dart out from the undergrowth and sprint across the field. The scream seemed to have come from it. What I saw next still gives me the chills. A huge creature, something like a wolf, but not quite, was chasing after the rabbit. It had an enormous mane of fur around its neck and was snarling ferociously. The creature caught up with the rabbit in no time and clamped its jaws around its neck. Blood splattered everywhere. I turned around and sprinted back to my cabin, locking myself in. My heart was pounding in my chest. I had never seen anything like that before. The most terrifying part was that this creature, this beast, was running on its hind legs. Its body was eerily humanoid, except for its monstrous size and the thick fur. My mind was filled with thoughts of Bruno. I couldn't stop worrying about him. I decided to alert my neighbors. The few I could reach were convinced that it must have been a mountain lion, the largest known predator in the area. I tried to convince them otherwise, but what could I say? I didn't know what I had seen. Feeling a sense of responsibility, I decided to alert everyone. I knocked on the last cabin's door and was greeted by this old sunburnt guy, rugged and a bit intimidating. He said he's seen that wolf. At first I thought he was talking about Bruno, but he was referring to the monstrosity that had chased the rabbit. As I stood there, dumbfounded, trying to explain what I had seen, he invited me into his cabin and pulled out a sketchbook. He flipped to a page with a sketch, and I swear, it looked incredibly similar to the beast I had seen. This guy, he had recently moved in with his son. He used to live across the valley and had encountered this creature when he was out hunting. He referred to it as the Dog Man. He narrated his encounter. He initially mistook it for a regular wolf, but when it stood upright, he realized he was dealing with something far more sinister. I was dumbstruck by his story. I suggested that we should call the cops. He just chuckled. I stepped outside his cabin, feeling overwhelmed. And that's when I saw Bruno. Bruno came sprinting towards me, whimpering and shaking uncontrollably. I picked him up and held him close. He was shaking like a leaf. I took him home, wrapped him in a blanket, and held him tight. At that moment, everything seemed surreal. But after hearing similar stories on your channel, I've come to accept that what I saw was real. I pray to never encounter such a creature again. We moved out as soon as our lease was up. Grand Canyon National Park, August of 2022. My name is Andrew, and I have an extraordinary tale to share about an encounter I had in the Grand Canyon National Park. I was on a rafting trip with my friends, a tradition we've had for years. This year, the Grand Canyon was our chosen destination, and it was a bright afternoon when the incident occurred. We had left on our journey from a launch point at the top of the river. I remember the air was crisp, and the sound of the rushing water was a constant companion. We navigated the river's twists and turns, each bend revealing more of the park's breathtaking beauty. As we were maneuvering through a particularly challenging rapid, my eyes were scanning the surroundings. I've always been fascinated by wildlife, always on the lookout for something unusual, and I was about to come across something truly remarkable. We reached a calm stretch of the river, and I steered us towards a sandy bank for a break. As I was securing the raft, I glanced up towards the canyon walls, and suddenly I froze. Perched on a ledge, about 100 feet above us was a creature that resembled a bird, but was the size of a human. It was colossal, and as I squinted, I could make out the face of an eagle and glossy black feathers and broad, powerful wings. But its eyes were sharp and intelligent, and it stood on 2 legs, much like a human. Instinctively, I moved towards it, leaving the others behind. For some reason, I was being drawn closer. However, once I got close enough to see it clearly, fear gripped me. But as I scrutinized the creature, I realized that it didn't seem hostile or dangerous. In fact, it looked just as startled to see us as we were to see it. As I stood there, gazing at the creature in astonishment and disbelief, I couldn't help but marvel at its immense size. It must have been at least 6 feet tall, its silhouette stark against the canyon wall. Its body was covered in sleek, dark feathers, which contrasted sharply with the red and orange hues of the canyon. Its muscular wings were folded at its sides, spanning an impressive length. My heart pounded with fear. The legends I had heard about thunderbirds flashed through my mind. But as I observed the creature more closely, I noticed that it had a regal expression in its large, golden eyes. It seemed curious rather than threatening. The creature spread its wings, a slow, deliberate movement that was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. I held my breath, unsure of how it would react. To my surprise, it didn't take flight. Instead, it remained perched on the ledge, tilting its head slightly as if trying to understand our presence. I decided to take a step back, hoping to show that we meant no harm. To my relief, the creature mirrored my movement, retracting its wings slightly. It was as if it understood my intentions and didn't want to provoke us. We continued this silent exchange, each of us observing the other. It was a surreal experience, like being part of a silent dialogue between 2 beings from different worlds. I felt a sense of connection, a bond formed through our mutual curiosity. Time seemed to stand still as we remained locked in our gaze. The river around us was tranquil, as if holding its breath, creating an atmosphere of enchantment and mystery. It felt like I had stumbled into a different world, a place where mythical creatures were real. Despite the fear still simmering within me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder. I was witnessing something extraordinary, a moment that most people could only dream of. But as much as I wanted to stay and delve deeper into the encounter, a part of me knew it was time to retreat. With a final glance at the creature, I slowly turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. I made my way back to where my friends were still lounging by the raft, my mind racing with a mix of emotions. I couldn't wait to share my encounter with them, to describe in vivid detail what I had just experienced. They could see the truth in my eyes. I recounted every detail, from the creature's appearance to our silent communication. They listened intently, hanging on to every word. Some were amazed, while others remained skeptical. Then, as a group, we all continued down the river. But despite all of us looking around, we found no further signs of the creature. The rest of the day passed by in a blur, a mix of thrilling rapids and laughter with my friends. We concluded our rafting trip as planned, reaching our campsite just as the sun began to set. Emotionally, each friend had a different response to my unexpected encounter. Some felt a sense of wonder and gratitude, while others felt a lingering unease, a reminder of the unknown lurking within the depths of the canyon. But we all agreed that it was a day we would never forget.